Say, hooker, before you became an idiot looking for gold, what were you?
An idiot without any.
When Gary Cooper died in 1961, Hollywood mourned one of its last true gentlemen, the quiet cowboy, the war hero, the everyman who embodied decency on screen. But beneath that noble image was a man who had witnessed the industry's ugliest games firsthand. In his final years, Cooper confided to friends that Hollywood had changed, that the studio system he once served had become a place where men smile at you while sharpening their knives. It's easy to imagine a myth like the one now circulating. Before his death, Gary Cooper revealed the 6 most evil actors he ever worked with. But no such list exists. What does exist are Cooper's real words, his frustrations, rivalries, and quiet betrayals that shaped his life behind the camera.
Around Brisbane here is very beautiful. The most important impression, I believe, is...
In this video, we'll separate truth from gossip, uncover the feuds he never spoke about publicly, and explore how this calm, soft-spoken legend handled the industry's darker side. From ego clashes and romantic scandals to political showdowns that nearly ended his career. These are the real stories that fed the myth. Number 6. The studio system turns on its hero. In the 1930s and 40s, Gary Cooper was Hollywood's golden boy. Tall, handsome, soft-spoken, and as American as apple pie. Yet by the end of his career, he privately described the studio system as a beautiful prison. Behind the courteous smiles and crisp tuxedos, he saw greed, manipulation, and betrayal. The myth goes that he quietly kept a mental list of those who'd wronged him. Not actors he hated, but institutions that exploited everyone. The first name on that list wasn't a rival star. It was the studio system itself. Cooper had come up during the Paramount years when actors were treated like inventory. Contracts dictated every aspect of their lives. From the scripts they filmed to the women they could date when he tried to turn down parts that felt wrong, executives would threaten suspension or smear campaigns. A 1940s column in Photoplay even hinted that Cooper was difficult and ungrateful, simply because he wanted creative input. Years later, he told a friend that he learned to smile for the cameras and fight in silence. The fight grew louder after World War II. By then, Cooper was one of the few stars who had survived the transition from silent films to talkies, and still dominated the box office. But Hollywood's moral codes and its power brokers hadn't changed. Gossip writers spread rumors about his love life, and studios pressured him into roles that conflicted with his conscience. He famously turned down Gone with the Wind, later joking that he would have been terrible as Rhett Butler. Yet that decision led to whispers that he was afraid of competition. In the 1950s, McCarthyism swept through Hollywood, and the industry's hypocrisy reached its peak. Cooper was politically conservative but believed deeply in fairness. He testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee, but instead of naming names, he spoke cautiously, saying he had heard of communist influence but couldn't accuse anyone personally. That nuance infuriated both sides. Liberals saw him as complicit, while conservatives branded him as weak. It was the ultimate example of how Hollywood devoured its own. As Cooper's health declined, he confided to friends that the glamour of the business was all a front. In one of his final interviews, he said, "There's too much acting in Hollywood, and I don't mean in front of the camera." It's a devastating line, one that reveals how disillusioned he'd become with the world that made him famous. Still, he never lost his dignity. Even as studios recycled his image for profit, he remained a gentleman, quiet, modest, but never blind to the corruption around him. To Cooper, the real evil of Hollywood wasn't a person, but a machine. One that consumed talent and discarded humanity. He once told a younger actor, "Don't let them own you completely. Not your name, not your heart." Those words may not sound like rebellion, but in old Hollywood, they were as radical as any fistfight. Number 5. Clark Gable, The Friendship That Soured.
I've just returned from the 8th Air Force, commanded by General Aker.
Gary Cooper and Clark Gable were two of the biggest male stars of the 1930s and 40s, Hollywood's twin ideals of rugged masculinity. On the surface, they were friends, often photographed together at social events or hunting trips, but privately, their relationship was complicated. In a business where image was everything, two alphas couldn't occupy the same space for long. Cooper was quiet, understated, the embodiment of sincerity. Gable, meanwhile, was brash and charismatic, a man who could charm a room with a grin. The contrast drew them together and ultimately pulled them apart. Their friendship began during MGM's golden years. When they were both rising fast, they shared drinks, swapped gossip, and admired each other's work. But tension surfaced during the filming of Saratoga in 1937. A film Gable starred in opposite Jean Harlow Cooper was considered for a similar MGM role, and executives were quick to compare the two men in the press. Publicists pushed the idea that Gable was the king of Hollywood, while Cooper was the American hero. To Gable, those titles mattered. To Cooper, they were meaningless. But they created a silent rivalry all the same. What really drove a wedge between them was the culture of competition that MGM and Paramount thrived on. Studio bosses loved to pit stars against each other to boost publicity. Gossip columnists began printing stories that Gable thought Cooper wooden and dull, while Cooper supposedly called Gable a salesman, not an actor. Neither ever confirmed it, but both were too proud to deny it. Their final break came after World War II. Cooper had served as an ambassador for the war effort, traveling to visit troops and filming morale-boosting shorts. Gable, grieving the death of his wife Carol Lombard in a plane crash, enlisted as an airman. They reunited briefly in the late 40s, but Cooper sensed a hardness in Gable. The war had changed him, and Hollywood's changing landscape didn't suit either of them anymore. When the blacklist era began, Gable withdrew from politics, while Cooper, though cautious, spoke publicly about freedom and individual conscience. The ideological gulf between them widened. By the time of Cooper's illness in the late 1950s, the two men had little contact. Yet, in a quiet moment, Cooper told a friend that he still admired Gable's courage and endurance. "He was a fighter," he said, "but he fought the wrong battles." It was a typically Cooper-like comment, reflective, sad, and forgiving. Their rivalry had never been truly personal. It was the product of a system that thrived on comparison, that fed egos and fueled insecurity. Cooper once joked that Hollywood had more jealousies than a sorority house. In that world, even friendship became competition. Do you think two legends like Cooper and Gable could ever have remained true friends in such a cutthroat environment? Number 4. Ernest Hemingway. Friendship, jealousy, and the bitter split.
Serious internal injuries that I received in the air crashes, and that he believes that it would be very bad for me.
Gary Cooper and Ernest Hemingway were the unlikeliest of best friends, a Hollywood actor and a hard-drinking writer bound by adventure, hunting, and a deep mutual respect. They met in the 1940s when Cooper starred in For Whom the Bell Tolls. Based on Hemingway's novel, the writer admired Cooper's quiet dignity. Cooper admired Hemingway's courage and discipline. For a time, they were inseparable, fishing in Idaho, swapping war stories, and writing long letters filled with jokes and advice. But as with many Hollywood friendships, admiration eventually turned to rivalry. Hemingway could be charming, but also fiercely territorial. He hated to see his work distorted by the studios, and when For Whom the Bell Tolls became a blockbuster, he began to resent Cooper's fame. "Everyone thinks I wrote it for him," he reportedly grumbled to friends. Cooper, who valued loyalty above all else, was wounded by the bitterness creeping into Hemingway's jokes. Their friendship began to unravel after the release of The Snows of Kilimanjaro in 1952, another Hemingway adaptation. Cooper was initially approached for the lead role, but declined due to scheduling conflicts. Gregory Peck took the part instead, and Hemingway's letters turned frostier. He teased Cooper for being too saintly to play sinners, a dig that cut deep. The jabs didn't stop there. When gossip columnists printed rumors that Cooper was becoming self-righteous, Hemingway quipped, "He's still the best of the good guys, but God save us from good guys." The rift grew even wider during the 1950s when both men struggled with aging. Cooper's health was declining, while Hemingway's mind was unraveling under the weight of depression and paranoia. Yet, in their darker moments, they still thought of each other. Hemingway once admitted to a friend that he missed Coop and that no one else listened the way he did. Cooper, for his part, told his wife that Hemingway needed kindness more than criticism.
It would be impossible for me to ask the ambassador of my country to read a speech in which a writer said all of the things which are in his heart.
The tragedy of their friendship came full circle in 1961. When Cooper died in May of that year, Hemingway was devastated. He attended the small memorial service in Ketchum, Idaho, standing silently at the back, weeping behind his sunglasses. 2 months later, Hemingway took his own life. In death, the bond they'd shared, built on admiration, strained by ego, and destroyed by time, became a haunting reflection of what fame can do to friendship. Two men who embodied strength and solitude had been undone by the very myth that defined them. Cooper once said of Hemingway, he lived the way he wrote, straight and dangerous. It was meant as praise, but it could just as easily describe Cooper himself. Both were men out of their time, honest to a fault, allergic to pretension, and forever chasing truth in a town built on lies. So, was their falling out inevitable? Can two strong personalities truly remain friends when pride and publicity get between them? Number 3, Ingrid Bergman, Love, Scandal, and Disillusionment.
I had plenty of that in all my Italian movies. My former husband hated actors. He loved to pick out the amateurs.
Gary Cooper and Ingrid Bergman's relationship began with admiration and ended in heartbreak. Another chapter in Cooper's long war between private decency and Hollywood temptation. They met while filming For Whom the Bell Tolls in 1942, when both were at the height of their fame. Cooper was already married. Bergman was too. Yet on that set, beneath the hot lights and mountain backdrops, their chemistry ignited. Bergman later admitted she fell for him almost instantly. He was the most completely natural man I ever knew. She said in one interview Cooper felt the same, but kept his emotions hidden under the mask of professionalism that defined him. Their affair was whispered about, but never publicly confirmed. Still, the tenderness they displayed on screen was impossible to fake. It became one of Hollywood's worst-kept secrets. The tragedy of their relationship wasn't the romance itself, but what it revealed about the Hollywood machine. Both were moral people trapped in an amoral system. Studio publicists carefully managed the image of Saint Ingrid, while Cooper's handlers preserved his reputation as the wholesome American hero. When Bergman's later affair with Italian director Roberto Rossellini became public, she was vilified. Senators denounced her on the floor of Congress. Fan clubs dissolved overnight. Cooper, privately sympathetic, was advised by Paramount to keep his distance. In a letter to a friend, Cooper lamented, "They build you up to heaven and then tear you down when you stumble." That was Hollywood's cycle, adoration followed by exile. He understood Bergman's pain because he'd lived it too, though in quieter ways. His own infidelities, including with Patricia Neal years later, had taught him that the town forgave charm but never honesty. What stung most was how art had imitated life. In For Whom the Bell Tolls, Cooper's character sacrifices himself for love. In real life, he sacrificed the chance at love for the sake of reputation. Bergman fled to Europe, branded immoral. Cooper stayed in America, branded impeccable. Both paid a price for choosing authenticity over illusion. When Bergman returned to Hollywood in the mid-1950s, years after her exile, she and Cooper met again at a dinner party. Witnesses described the encounter as quiet, respectful, but charged with nostalgia. Cooper reportedly told her, "You were brave, Ingmar, braver than I ever was." She smiled sadly and said, "You were always kind." That was the last time they saw each other. Looking back, Cooper told friends that Bergman represented the best part of the old world, grace with courage. Yet he also admitted she reminded him of his own compromises. Their relationship became a mirror of what he loved and hated about the industry. Its beauty, its duplicity, its endless hunger for drama. Ingrid Bergman and Gary Cooper's story isn't just a scandalous footnote. It's a parable about what happens when decency meets desire in a place built on make-believe. Number 2, Patricia Neal. Passion, scandal, and regret.
That you're a strong person?
I think I am. I don't know. Who knows if you're strong or not, but
well, you seem to have such great resilience.
Yes, I do have it. Of course,
The affair between Gary Cooper and Patricia Neal was one of Hollywood's most talked about scandals. A love story that was equal parts tender, reckless, and destructive. When they met in 1949 on the set of The Fountainhead, Cooper was 48 and married with a teenage daughter. Neal was 23, fresh-faced, ambitious, and completely unaware of the storm she was walking into. Their chemistry on screen was undeniable. The fire between Howard Rourke and Dominique Franchon seemed to leap beyond the camera lens. Off-screen, that passion intensified. Neal later recalled that Cooper was unlike any man she'd ever met. He had that quiet strength. When he looked at you, you felt safe and in danger at the same time. But what began as an affair of emotion soon became a tug-of-war between love and conscience. Cooper was torn. Raised with strong moral values, he believed deeply in marriage and family, yet he couldn't resist Neal. Friends noticed how he softened around her, how his shy smile returned. But as whispers spread through Hollywood, the relationship became impossible to hide. His wife, Veronica "Rocky" Cooper, found out and was devastated. When she confronted Neal, she reportedly said, "I'll never divorce him. You can have the ashes." The scandal turned vicious. Studio executives warned Neal that she was endangering her career. Newspapers ran suggestive headlines. Under the glare of public judgment, Cooper began to pull away, ashamed of how far things had gone. Yet when Neal suffered a breakdown from the pressure, he returned to her side, unable to let go completely. Their affair lasted 3 tumultuous years. Neal later admitted she became pregnant with Cooper's child but ended the pregnancy. Knowing the public fallout would destroy them both, "I loved him, but I couldn't keep him," she said decades later. He belonged to another life, a life he couldn't abandon. When Cooper ended the relationship, Neal spiraled into depression. She left Hollywood temporarily, seeking peace far from the cameras. Years later, when she built a new life and family with writer Roald Dahl, she looked back on Cooper not with bitterness, but with sadness. "He was the only man who ever truly loved me," she confessed in her memoir. For Cooper, the affair left lasting scars. His marriage never recovered, and his health began to deteriorate soon after. Still, he spoke of Neal with tenderness in private, referring to her as a wonderful girl, too young for the mess I made. Their story encapsulates everything intoxicating and tragic about old Hollywood. Forbidden love, public scandal, and the quiet ache of choices made too late. It wasn't a tale of villains and saints, but of two flawed people caught between desire and duty. Do you think Cooper's sense of morality made him noble for walking away? Or weak for not fighting for the woman he truly loved? Number 1. Hollywood itself. The role that broke Gary Cooper. In the end, the greatest adversary Gary Cooper ever faced wasn't a person. It was Hollywood itself. The industry that built his legend also consumed him, shaping him into the very image of moral perfection that no human being could sustain. Beneath the calm smile and gentle baritone was a man exhausted by expectation, uneasy with fame, and quietly disillusioned by the world that worshipped him. Cooper rose to prominence in the late 1920s, just as silent film stars were being replaced by talking pictures. His natural stillness translated beautifully to sound. He didn't have to act much. His pauses spoke louder than any line. But that restraint became his prison. Studio executives marketed him as the all-American hero, a symbol of decency in an age of cynicism. The truth was far more complicated. He doubted himself constantly, hated interviews, and dreaded premieres. He once told a friend, "I'm just an actor. They make me out to be something I'm not." Behind the scenes, Cooper was more human than Hollywood allowed. He drank when anxious, sought solitude in the mountains, and surrounded himself with a small circle of loyal friends who didn't care about fame. His friendships with writers like Ernest Hemingway and director William Wyler grounded him, but they couldn't shield him from the industry's demands. Every success brought new scrutiny. Every moral role fed a myth he never asked to live up to. By the mid-1950s, his health was failing, and the persona he'd built began to feel like an old costume that no longer fit. During the making of Friendly Persuasion, 1956, he confided to co-star Dorothy McGuire that he was tired of playing saints. "People think I'm always sure of myself," he said, "but half the time I'm scared stiff." The irony wasn't lost on him. The man who had defined courage on screen was privately terrified of being found out as ordinary. When illness forced him to slow down, Cooper began reflecting on his career with uncharacteristic honesty. In one of his final interviews, he remarked, "Hollywood gives you everything except peace." He had played cowboys, soldiers, and pioneers who embodied America's ideals, but in his final years, he understood those ideals had cost him his privacy and peace of mind. The last image many remember of Cooper is from the 1961 Academy Awards. When his friend James Stewart accepted an honorary Oscar on his behalf, Stewart's voice broke as he said, "We're very proud of you, Coop." The audience rose to its feet in applause, unaware that Cooper was home in bed, terminally ill, listening on the radio. He wept quietly. Gary Cooper's greatest performance wasn't in High Noon or Sergeant York. It was the lifelong act of being Gary Cooper, the man who embodied goodness even when his world wasn't kind. So perhaps the real question isn't who he hated or what rivalries defined him, but whether Hollywood, in its endless hunger for heroes, can ever love the real person behind the myth. By the time Gary Cooper passed away in 1961, Hollywood had already turned him into a symbol, the stoic hero, the moral compass, the face of a simpler America. Yet, as we've seen, his real life was far more complex. Behind every quiet smile on screen was a man wrestling with doubt, guilt, and a longing for authenticity in a town built on illusion. He loved deeply but imperfectly, from the innocence of Ingrid Bergman to the heartbreak of Patricia Neal. And in those relationships, we glimpsed the humanity the studios tried to hide. Cooper was not a saint, nor was he the flawless hero audiences imagined. He was instead a man constantly at odds with the machine that made him famous. Even as his health failed, Cooper refused self-pity. Friends said he faced death with the same quiet grace that defined his characters. In his final note to his daughter Maria, he wrote, "Live simply. Speak truth. Don't be afraid to be kind." It was the closest thing to a confession he ever gave. A reminder that his greatest role was not on screen, but in the dignity with which he carried himself when the cameras stopped rolling. Today, more than 60 years later, Gary Cooper's image endures not because he was perfect, but because he was human. His life reminds us that heroes aren't born in studios. They're forged through struggle, contradiction, and the courage to remain decent in a world that rewards pretense. So, what do you think? Was Gary Cooper Hollywood's last true gentleman? Or simply the last man brave enough to admit he wasn't one? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and thank you for watching this story of grace, conflict, and quiet heroism.